Hi, my name is William Bond, and this is Bond Reports number 2. Our topic today is, when does something become a science? When is it a science? Albert Camus said this: searching for the truth, if absolute truth belongs to anybody in the world, it certainly is not belonging to the man or party that claims to possess it, and only it. And that is a big key. You define many things not by what they are, but what they aren't. You know, if ignorance is bliss, why aren't you smiling? If a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, T.H. Huxley, Thomas H. Huxley, where's the man who has so much as to be out of danger? Here we have, this is me, doing a little of my own field work on something that unfortunately did not pan out for the guy I was doing it for. A curious and inquiring mind, observation. Albert Einstein said this the best in terms of how to produce more knowledge. He said, to do physics, you need a pen and a paper in the wastebasket. To do philosophy, you just need the pen and the paper. And I think that's a pretty good thing to remember. Science is a little different. Thomas Paine, paraphrased here a little bit, said, heaven knows what price to place upon our articles, and strange indeed would it be if so celestial an article as freedom were to be cheaply bought or meanly won. Now, knowledge is in that same category as freedom. It's not given away easily. It's not cheaply bought or meanly won. The early experiences with phenomena, as people try to explain phenomena, which can be done, go into folklore, edging into witchcraft. And, you know, the fact that it's not really that way doesn't stop people from building on it. Here are alchemical symbols of elaborate systems of pseudo-knowledge that their detail and their internal logic is not inhibited by the fact that none of this really exists, and it's all nonsense. They have an internal logic to them. They sound believable. So one might fondly imagine that the levels of detail and complexity of a body of lore presented as fact express some evidence that it's real. And that's not at all the case. Here we have what I found to be an interesting concept, witchcraft myths. And it gives some common, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, common misconceptions about witchcraft. And the central misconception is that witchcraft itself is a myth. So these are people pointing out myths about what they don't recognize to be their myth. The fact that it's not based on anything, and it's just kind of a myth squared. It's hard to do that. But with this system, the complexity doesn't mean that it's real. You've got whole systems, witchcraft for beginners, essential tools. Don't leave home without, your Iphthano. Don't leave, your wand. Never forget that. The symbols, the system. Stanislaw Lem, the science fiction writer, said this was a nice thing. Discovered 3 kinds of dragon: the mythical, chimerical, and the purely hypothetical. None of them existed. They were all, one might say, non-existent, but each non-existed in an entirely different way. We're beginning to chop some logic, and logic will take us some places. Witchcraft gets split into schools of thought. Traditional witchcraft, don't be a stick in the mud, go with the new stuff. Who's thinking up the new stuff? This is arbitrary nonsense, nothing. And the fact that there's schools of thought about it tell you kind of what you need to know. Edith Sitwell said it the best. I am patient with ignorance, but not with those that are proud of it. And a lot of the time, you can have pseudo-knowledge and lack of knowledge portray itself as other things. One of the things about science also, the greatest deception that people suffer from is their own opinions. The greatest misconceptions, you believe in yourself, you think you weren't deluded, you think this, you think that. Science, you're trying to get that out. There's a John Kenneth Galbraith here, variously attributed, but some things really do say they're sciences. Economic forecasting, I've seen this in my own lifetime. His quote that the only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable, I think that's funny. And it's in the same class as witchcraft. This is the air guitar championships they have every year in Finland, which sound very inspiring. And it's the World Air Guitar Championships. The wars will end. This is their this is their motto of their meeting. Wars will end. Climate change will stop, and all bad things will vanish when all the people in the world play the air guitar. Now, that actually has the ring of truth to me, but I mean, it's done in a spirit of jest, but not entirely. Frederick Hebel said it the best, and you can tell you're going to get a pretty dour quote out of this guy looking at his picture, but it's incredible how much intelligence is used in the world to prove nonsense. You read this, and I'm thinking of a guy's marketing I had to read yesterday while I was trying to find his cell number. Lincoln really did say you can fool some of the people some of the time, but the rest really are fooling themselves. People want to believe in something, and they'll believe in anything. Peter Cook said this one time, I thought it was very good. The idea is not to repeat them. I'm sure I can repeat them exactly. I think I learned from my mistakes. Richard Feynman said this the best. He's one of the top scientists of the 20th century. Science is belief in the ignorance of experts. You don't want to have an authority or people telling you what to do. You check for yourself. You ascertain what the facts are. You change things around. But it's a belief in the ignorance of experts. John Marshall Harlan said this the best. Now, this is a Supreme Court justice, and he had reversed himself on an earlier decision and was, as much as Supreme Court justices get called out about that. And he said, let it be said that I am right rather than consistent, which is the hallmark of science, not necessarily a law, but is the hallmark of science. If you're trying to be right, you'll get with people, oh, this is bad for you. You know, last year they said this was bad for you. Last year they said this. Now they turn it around all the time. How can you believe it? Well, if you're trying to be right, you're not going to be consistent all the time. And that's kind of the hallmark of people trying to be right. Let it be said that you're right rather than consistent. We begin to edge then into pseudoscience. And I'm sure there's a pseudoscientific method for everything. You hear this constantly, things masquerading as sciences that are not. Witchcraft, again, a form. They had it down to a pseudoscience. That's one of my personally little favorites. But my own favorite is, excuse me, young man, I'm a pseudoscientist. And I am sure there must be a pseudoscientific explanation for what you're saying. And it's hard to go through a day without somebody basically saying that. Let's get scientific. Are you a Gemini? Trust the science. I hear this constantly. Trust the science. Here's some medieval doctors keeping themselves safe from the plague. Wearing the get up like that, going around to people. And if somebody says something to them, you just say, trust the science. This is what we've been done. We think this, and this is a body of lore. Yeah, you listen to all that story. You're one of these medieval guys. Well, yeah, okay. But did you try leeches? Tried and true. You know, body of knowledge. This is people in general. Ernst Rutherford said it the best. You need to get some mathematics into it, and it's not a bunch of description. All science is physics or stamp collecting. Now, this is physics talking in there. First off, you got to get your terminology right. Howard Hughes called a famous international paper, and he said, I am tired of reading about myself in the paper as a deranged millionaire. Well, damn it, I'm a billionaire. And that's just a favorite of mine. Junior Soprano talking to Tony. I don't remember what episode or what season it was. Junior says to Tony, I always said that kid was stupid. And Tony says, his mother told me he had a learning disability or something. And Junior said, that's what stupid is, right? Well, yeah, Junior, that is right. I complimented a good friend of mine, Joe Rigsby, on a landing. He'd made a landing with me in the plane, and I said, that was a good landing. He said, that was a great landing. I told him that seemed a little not very modest, and this is evidently from Chuck Yeager. A good landing is when everybody walks away, and a great landing is when you can use the airplane again. Well, I'd never been to flight school. I didn't know that. You got to get your terminology correct. I've seen this done. This is done at meetings. All you need to do, and Julia Child said it the best to the camera, if you're trying to sell your science, speak very loudly and quickly and state your position with utter conviction, as the French do, and you'll have a marvelous time. That's true. And I'm put in mind of that. I've seen that done in meetings, and people would say, I don't believe that, and I feel like the old Texas boy who is asked if he believed in infant baptism, and he said, well, believe in it? Well, hell, I've seen it done. And I've seen it done in that case. I mean, that's very much that. If you're going to have science, you can't have political type interference with your field work. And there's different kinds of politics, not always national, but there's, God knows, internal science politics, God knows, particularly when you get sums of money involved, as in when the science is directly used for research for goods. But we won't do that. Saddam is probably talking about national. I'm sure the study doesn't mean that. Correct the study. Normally that's done by the way you do crime statistics. Then you just start redefining crime and you can make it all go away. Just redefine the problem and you find there's no problem. The reserve, it's not self-evident. Hercule Poirot said that in Agatha Christie, of course, Evil Under the Sun, in this particular case. He gets asked about 3 questions by one of the characters, and she says, Madame, I reserve the explanations for the final chapter. I won't attempt to do the Belgian accent. Wolfgang Pauli said it's the best. You can get this at a grand rounds. That's not right, and that's not even wrong. You're not even close. You're in the same. You're addressing the same. Lord Kelvin is the guy who's defining what really a science is. When you can express it in numbers, when you know what you're speaking about, when you cannot measure it and you cannot count it, and your knowledge is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. That phrase will run through many science things. Science envy, talking about Sigmund Freud there, but you've got popular impression of science. Labs and people working at microscopes and blackboards full of equations, things like that. You want quantitative knowledge, numbers, things you can count. Also, you want an idea of where you are in the world. How much noise are you counting? What are you really trying to do? And how accurate are your instruments? And what is the sound of shit not happening? But that's harder than one might think. And you have things sloppily worded. I can picture the form. He's filling out a form on this. I can't imagine what form or for membership and what exactly. But he said, my sexual preference is off. I'm pretty sure they asked him something else. If you're going to measure in science, the whole point of this was you need to measure, you need to get the right units. To count something, you need to have units. Measure it in this. It was 10 feet. It was 33,000 square yards. It was this, that. The metric system has never really caught on in the United States except for the drug trade and the 9mm bullet. For some reason, people are perfectly natural with that. They'll ask you what a kilo is, but the drug trades, they don't say 8 pounds of heroin. But I've never heard it. The metric system's never really caught on, so presumably it'd be metric. You can measure some offbeat quantities. For instance, a measurement of beauty, a measurement of feminine pulchritude. Helen of Troy is the face that launched 1,000 ships. Therefore, the amount of beauty to launch one ship, 1 millihelen in this case, 1,000 millihelens in one Helen, and that might be Ernest Rutherford. Back Bond Report 1, using some slides. All science is physics or stamp collecting. And he actually did some atom smashing with that thing that looked like something your high school sophomore kid had built in the basement. But trust the science. So, and here's again. But that's Feynman's whole point. Science doesn't even trust itself, or shouldn't. That is the very opposite of science. The very essence of science, once again, Feynman, is don't trust anything, including it. I'm science, don't trust me. Science is what you can see. And sometimes you find yourself in a very lonely spot. Yeah, everybody else is wrong and I'm right. Well, what if you are right? Robert Heinlein writing, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Well, science is a harsh mistress too. And there's some rigorous things you want to do. Dr. Semmelweis, this is the initial guy in the 1880s in Vienna. And the blood poisoning, the guys that put their hands in there to get placentas out, the blood poisoning that the mothers got was in excess of 80%. They're on wards and things. So you made them all septic. And with this, horrendous, of course, death rates and everything else. And he said, you know what? Why don't we start washing our hands? And he was hounded out of the profession. Basically, his life was ruined in systematic ways that people went after him. And he was Hungarian, and they got on him for, Asia starts at the Danube. And he died of a severe beating. He got in the insane asylum where he wound up and was left to die. Alfred Wegener, who you may not have heard of, is looking at his globe and decides that, well, gee, the coast of South America sure fits into Africa, doesn't it? And you've got this and you got that, and it doesn't take much imagination. Maybe these big continents move around and they're based on plates. And for that belief, he was hounded out of the profession, laughed at, scorned, made a mockery of, couldn't get good jobs, went finally on a third-rate expedition to Greenland, where he died like 50 feet from the shelter thing that they had, because you couldn't see and it was a whiteout, and he froze to death out there from being on a third-rate expedition. Harold Ridley, an example closer to my own time. There is a British hurricane. They happen to make the canopies of the British hurricane out of a plastic called polymethyl methacrylate, and it turns out that fragments of that are very well tolerated in the eyes from combat, and therefore he correctly reasoned you could make an implant out of this rather than all of the distortion and awful things of aphakic vision. And for these things, he was viciously hounded out of the profession. It's mostly by a guy named Sir Stuart Duke Elder. Had his life ruined. He actually got rehabilitated in his own lifetime, was knighted, had some other things going for him. But all three of those guys, all they had going for them, Dr. Semmelweis, Dr. Wegener, Dr. Ridley, all they had going for them was they were absolutely right. And the politics of the science of their day, which is very, very, very real, is in there. So when we hear trust the science, science shouldn't even trust itself. That is the opposite of science. One last example, Star Trek, the movie. You'll hear some nonsense out of people. Gee, well, what was the matter with it? I didn't like it. It was too far-fetched. He said they had that Klingon saying things that no actual Klingon would ever say. Please, come on. Wising you up is not at all a high priority for Mother Nature. And it goes both ways. They'll say it needs protection from us. If you've ever spent some time outside, you need some protection from it. There was no commercial, so it's not nice to fool Mother Nature. And I'm going to give an example of statistical evidence. There is a medical condition called general paresis, very prominent in the 19th century. And general paresis is advanced neurosyphilis. Your brain basically turns to toothpaste. And it tends to appear 10 to 30 years after the initial treponema infection. It's the late, it's the late stage manifestation of untreated syphilis, the big dreaded one. Comes much later, causes basically what you get when your brain turns to oatmeal. Dementia, mood alteration, memory loss, impaired judgment, leading to death. So the guys of the 19th century, they don't even have a germ theory of disease. You're not in a position to know how to ask the question that's going to lead you about 3 questions down this line. There's no way with the knowledge of your time for you to pose that question. There's no germ theory, there's no transmission, there's no nothing. And so they try and reason this out. The mechanism, so let's try some statistics. Traveling salesman, 100 years on the road as opposed to clergyman. Let's get some groups together. Let's compare different types of groups. This was done in the 1880s. Basically, they concluded that this manifestation of neurosyphilis, long-term syphilis, neurosyphilis, which turns into this dreaded thing, was from getting jounced around in the stagecoaches and the carriages of their time, and a lot of movement, shaking up the brain, because these traveling salesmen, they travel in stagecoaches, and they're shaken up a lot, and they've got a rate of that neurosyphilis 15 times that of the average clergyman. There's some Venn diagram and mix and match there, and there are exceptions to this, I'm sure. But of these large numbers that they had of this, they made the medical conclusion based on evidence, based on the questions they could ask in their time, that this was from getting jounced around in a stagecoach. You've assembled your statistical evidence, but evidence of what? You don't know the question to ask, and your science has not gotten to the point where you cannot know the questions you need to ask. You see this happen with computers now. There are several books that are interesting here. We develop further in roundsmanship, how to lie with statistics. You don't even know the question to ask. how to present statistics in a certain way. Your knowledge is not meager and not satisfactory, but it's just not at all correct. It relates to nothing, means nothing, doesn't do anything. If it takes hard work to make a science, science is belief in the ignorance of experts. I would go so far, my own version is science is disbelief in the expertise of experts. Thank you.